There are a couple things that I think are dead in marketing. I think things like webinars are dead.
I kind of disagree with you there. We've had some good success with webinars. It's like, hey, this is a problem. Don't pitch us how you're solving it, but like, let's talk about the problem, and then it elevates the brand of your company itself.
But I don't call that a webinar.
What do you call that?
Okay, here we go. We're back. Season 2, Connected Conversations. This conversation I'm really happy to have, as I'm lucky to have one of my former colleagues, Lauren Long, with me today. She is a marketing extraordinaire, if you will, in my opinion. Me and Lauren worked together a long time ago for a startup. Today, Lauren is the Director of Marketing Operations for Prescriptive Data. Prescriptive Data is the creator of Nantum. Lauren, did I get that right?
Nailed it.
I did. I had to practice that multiple times before we went live here, so I'm pretty proud of myself for getting all that right. Lauren, how are you today?
I'm doing good. Happy to be here with you, Bob. Nice to see you.
I'm great. I'm super excited for this. I'm really looking, so for the theme, and we'll get into this in a little bit, for this season of Connected Conversation is going back to the future. So I want to talk about all things future looking. But before we do that, if you could, Lauren, can you give us your statement of qualification as to why you are qualified to talk about all things marketing, and give us a little bit of history about yourself?
Sure. Well, as you put it, I'm a marketing phenom, so I'll try to work up to that. But I guess it all started back when I was a kid. My dad was a marketing executive. He was super creative. He was actually one of the on the creative design team of that Maxell ad, where the guy's getting like blown back in the chair from the speaker.
Yes.
So
the Maxell,
I think it's called Blown Away. Yeah.
Their music or cassettes are. Yeah, I used to make mixtapes for people. Go on, sorry.
Yeah. So I grew up with that. So I've always been of the mindset of how to relay messages to a group of people. So with that, I took communication and psychology classes in college, and then jumped into the real estate world, more on the Proptech side, where I worked with you.
Yes.
At a company that is no longer around, but we did good things. And from there, I spent a couple of years doing solo work for the Proptech world, mostly writing and consulting for marketing, including a couple of years at Propmoto, which is an awesome commercial real estate publication, if you're unfamiliar with it. And now I'm at Prescriptive Data. So I've been here for almost 5 months.
And what does Prescriptive Data do?
We're a building operation system. So we take all of your BMS, BAS, and third-party data, including occupancy is a big one, and use it to make your building run more efficiently. So the building owner saves money, the building uses less energy, everyone's happier and healthier.
Terrific. So let me ask you this before we get into today's topic. With that history and coming up in a marketing house, if you will, your dad was a madman.
Yep.
He was a legit madman. Coming up in that and then ending up in the prop tech world, what do you think of it? Is it something that you've been drawn to? Is it something that you kind of fell into? I fell into this. I fell into the property tech IWMS facilities. I fell into it. So what's your thoughts on it? Is it something that you're drawn to and really taking an interest to?
Yeah, I am now. I didn't start. Like if you'd asked me, 15 years ago, what do you want to work in? I would not have said buildings. Like,
yeah.
But I've always been drawn to technology. I like the innovation. I like being able to solve things with something cool.
Right.
And there's so much opportunity in real estate and buildings, and especially on the sustainability side, like trying to do something that makes a difference in the world is pretty important.
We just had a whole conversation. We had a conversation yesterday with a broker from CBRE, and she was talking a lot about the environmental and sustainability initiatives and how that factors into corporate real estate's market selection and how she has to provide that data to where, when I was thinking about brokerage, I was thinking more negotiating terms and conditions of a lease and less about things like environmental and sustainability considerations when you're looking for that property lease. So you're spot on with that. And would you say your first foray into all this is when we first met at the company that we were? The reason why I asked that, I was really happy to see you stick with it. Stay in this lane, stay in the corporate real estate, property tech, building tech. I was really happy to see that, because what I talk about with a lot of the younger generation is pick a lane, and you could be a sales guy for multiple, you can move on, but stay in your lane, because you're throwing out all that institutional knowledge and all that great stuff that you learn along the way, for lack of a better term, that provides a lot of value. So I was really happy to see you stick with it.
No, I learned a lot at that company, and I acted like a sponge. There were people there that knew a lot about the industry and building. And if I listened to them enough, some of it actually stuck. So that gave me a heads up, a foot ahead of other people that are trying to do what we're doing and what I'm doing.
I agree. So with that said, for the topic of this season, as I mentioned, we're going back to the future. I'm a big, Marty McFly, Doc Brown fan. That joke is probably going to get well overused over the course of this season, but it is what it is. So as we sit here and everything we went through recently, these past couple years, and now as we move into hopefully the future of work and the future of our industry, the building tech, prop tech, corporate real estate tech, whatever you want to call it, where are things going, Warren? What do you think has changed, needs to change? What are some of the trends you're seeing? I'm not asking you to give me an exact prediction of where things are going to go, but from your perspective, near term, long term, where are things going in marketing, particularly in our field?
Well, I think that, whether we wanted it or not, the last few years we had a lot of time to think about what we wanted to be a part of, what we wanted to do, how we wanted to live our lives.
Right.
And so because of that, people want things to be real. And that importance of authenticity needs to be reflected in marketing too. In a lot of social circles and in popular culture, there's this like cancellation culture, this cancel culture. So if people don't like what something stands for or what someone did, then they're cut. And I think marketing needs to be really sure that they're being authentic in what they're sharing, and not just product pitchy, like this is the new technology we have, and these are all the reasons why it's so great, but like why it actually matters. Like what problems is it solving? Right. I think that's really important.
So when you approach your day to day, right? And I agree with you 100%. And that's why what we're trying to do with Connected Conversations in this podcast is a wide variety of guests from the corporate real estate, facilities, technology industries coming together and talking about where the future is going, where they see things today, to provide some authentic content for our viewers and audience. So that's what we're trying to do. I'm not a marketer. I don't have a marketing or communications degree. I can hardly get through your title in your introduction. So it's like, but what I really do is I've been in this industry for a long time, and I stumbled into it, and it became something that I gained a wealth of knowledge about, and, became passionate about providing real solutions to people. And I couldn't agree to more. So as the director of marketing for Prescriptive Data, how do you bring that to your job every day? Give us some examples of where you're trying to drive authenticity with what you're doing.
I think one of the easy things to fall into as a marketer is to use buzzwords.
Oh, we have a no buzzwords policy here on this podcast. So go ahead.
Well, I don't know if I should walk out now or it's been fun.
Give us your hot take. Go ahead. Give us your hot take on buzzwords.
But I think buzzwords are the easy way out to sound like you know what you're talking about. Okay. And you can talk for hours and say nothing at all, but you're just using buzzwords. And it's tricky though, because in marketing, you need to have certain words like SEO, search engine optimization. You need to use what words people are looking for in your marketing to show up to solve what they're looking to solve. So there's a bit of a catch-22 there, but chances are building engineers aren't going to be searching for, optimization. They're going to be looking for energy improvement or energy efficiency. And that's, of course, a blanket statement, but marketers, especially in Proptech, need to kind of tone down the tech buzzwords and amplify what people are saying, like in real estate.
So I love what you just said there. It's a delicate balance, right? And you got to speak there. I used to say this when I would go into sales meetings. I would tell the team what to wear, believe it or not, and say, this is more of a group where we wear our polo shirts and not our suits. And then if we were going to talk to a director, C-level of real estate for a big technology firm, maybe we'd put our suits on. So it's like, you have to be familiar to them. So I love what you speak their language, but in the SEO world, you have to know what's being searched for. So you have to have a little bit of buzzwords and then a little bit of nomenclature that is native to that person that's your prospect. So how do you get that? How do you figure out what, say, a facilities manager would want, the words he would use? Is that engaging with them at conferences, industry events? How do you do that?
One of the best ways I think is talking to your customers, the ones who are using solutions, but it's not just for an individual solution. It's about the whole industry. So going to, I saw you a couple of weeks ago or whenever time was at Realcomm, that was a great place to meet and actually see people in real life. And hearing conversations, whether they were at breakout sessions or in the hallway or at, 2 a.m., the words that were being used in those different places probably changed, but the themes were the same. And so depending on who you were talking to and their titles go all over the place too. Like, we talked about sustainability. The person who's in charge of sustainability and needs Proptech solutions might have very different titles depending on the company they're at. Yes. They could be head of sustainability. It could be the chief engineer's job. It could be under, the chief revenue officer or maybe an asset manager. Or it could be some made up name, that no one's used before. So it's important to get feedback from the people you're trying to reach via that direct connection instead of, just guessing what they want to hear. But with all marketing, there's a little bit of trial and error, A/B testing, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't. So it's important to have data on how what you're doing is actually performing.
I could not, and I'm smiling because of this is what I explain to sales reps, because I work in a role where I kind of help younger sales reps. I sit on some of the larger opportunities to provide industry insight, to provide a little bit of color commentary about the functional use of our technology, because I've been there and I've done that. But what I always say is, if you don't know your industry and if you don't speak their language, you're going to have a very hard time connecting with your prospects and your customers. And I've been saying that for years now. And it's like, if somebody really wants to invest in this industry and come in and learn and go to the associations, the IFMAs, the BOMAs, the Cornets, and really learn, about the industry, then, hey, come on board. But if you're going to come in from some other software company and think, well, this is just enterprise software, this is an enterprise platform, I could sell it. And you don't speak their language and you don't know the difference between reactive maintenance, predictive maintenance, then you're gonna really struggle because you don't know their world and you don't know how to connect with them. And I just think what you said was brilliant, because at the end of the day, how are you going to connect with prospects if you're using optimization instead of energy efficiency, right? And it's just it's a really important aspect of marketing. Now I'm gonna hit you and try to throw a little bit of a curveball at you.
Ready.
There are a couple things that I think are dead in marketing, and I'm going to throw them at you, and you don't have to agree with me. You're more than welcome to disagree with me. I think things like webinars are dead. I think they're dead. Webinars approached from a sense of, let's tell you a case study about how our software solves somebody's problem. And then at the end of it, there's a slide with a contact number for sales. I think those webinars are dead. The other thing I've been struggling with post-pandemic, after we've come back and started going to conferences, I've been really struggling with conferences in the vendor halls. I've had a really hard time with this. And me and Fred were talking before the podcast kicked off, and he goes, we just went back. We created a new model at work where we left cubes. We're saying no more cubes. We're doing hybrid work, and there needs to be all this kind of, cafe type seating and open seating concepts. We're moving away from cubes there. But then when you go to a conference, you sit in a cube, you go back to a cube, and it needs to evolve a little bit. So I think webinars, and I think the vendor halls at conferences, I think people have been beat over the head with sales pitches over the last 2 years due to the pandemic and some of the messaging people were putting out there. But the conference halls, to me, the sessions are packed, but the conference hall is kind of empty. So those are my two hot takes on some marketing things that I've noticed over the last couple months and the last year, if you will. So
I think one of the issues that you're hitting on is like widespread marketing targeting. If you're just sprinkling it everywhere, the odds of you actually hitting something that is of significance is pretty low. So if you're targeted, if marketers have account-based marketing. So if you have a list of companies that you're going after, titles that they might include, and then you do your research to see what their challenges are, and then you approach those people directly, then you're going to have solid conversations, and they're actually going to want to talk to you because you're aware of a challenge they have and you have a way to help them with it. Right. So like at conferences, it's kind of sprinkling it, like the trade show floor. Mm-hmm. But if you have targeted meetings, set up ahead of time, or something really cool to see in person, not like a dry demo, but something that's really dynamic, something different. Mm-hmm. Like you said, people have been pitched at a lot, and it's important to differentiate yourselves. As for the webinars, I kind of disagree with you there. I think that we've had some good success with webinars being like one of 3 or one of 4 solution providers. So it's an open conversation. It's not so much.
I've done that. Go ahead. Okay.
So it's like, hey, this is a problem. Don't pitch us how you're solving it, but like, let's talk about the problem, and then it elevates the brand of your company itself.
But I don't call that a webinar.
What do you call that?
That's more like a virtual roundtable or a virtual panel. Okay. Not to get into semantics, but I think me using the blanket phrase of webinar and saying you did, more of like a general product pitch offered up to an audience, if you will. I feel it is dead. So, but carry on with what you're saying. Talk about how that worked.
Well, I really like how that works, because it's not only a good way for companies to create new partnerships with the other speakers and the relationships with people who are addressing similar challenges, but we found that to be pretty useful. And I still don't think webinars are dead. Like for people who don't want to have a conversation with someone yet, it's a really good way for them to get a demo
Yeah.
or have, a conversation if they throw in a question in the chat, but they don't get bombarded with questions. It's kind of a way to sit back and be a fly on the wall to learn about something.
Okay. So that leads to something that I think is a huge frustration in our industry, and particularly my lane of property tech, IWMS. If you go to find a research, so it goes back to what you were saying about the webinar. It's a good chance to kind of dip your toe in the water.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed. Good take on that. Everything's behind a paywall in my space. It's like, if you want to report on, the different technologies, their strengths and weaknesses, first of all, the companies that participate in that, we have to pay. And then if an end user wants to get to it, they have to pay. And a lot of times how these are done is somebody used a technology somewhere, somebody knows somebody and says, oh, that's a pretty good technology, or a consultant makes a recommendation. But to get a lot of that information, Fred sent me an article today about how Proptech is growing. And I'm scrolling through it and I'm like, oh, eventually there's going to be a link and it's going to be behind a paywall. And sure enough, it was behind a paywall.
Yeah.
So what's your take on that? Because I do think you struggle to get access to some of the data in some of these instances.
It's tough. And it's a discussion that I've had with many people, like both internally and at other companies, finding that right balance. Because from a company viewpoint, if you're creating really good content that's well researched and not product pitchy and helps someone solve their challenges, then you kind of want something for it. Like you want to know who's interested in it too. So it's not just an exchange of contact information. It's like, well, this message is resonating with people who are vice presidents of something, or no one that we thought this would be attractive to is downloading this. Like it's a good check.
Well, what you're talking about is also providing something, maybe a best practice around something. What I'm talking about is basically an analysis of this software does this. This one does all these things as well. This one has its weaknesses here. All that stuff's behind a paywall.
Yeah. I think that's one of the biggest challenges in prop tech in general. There's so much out there, and comparing and contrasting them is practically impossible.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's so many different lanes of prop tech, right? At the end of the day, you could be an IWMS company, you could be a data analytics platform, you could be a sensor, or you could be a ring cam that goes on the outside of somebody's doorway. It's all considered prop tech, if you will. And prop tech is more of a European term, I would think. I think that's where it was born out of. And it was only started to be used in the last 3 to 4 years, 5 years, maybe. Mm-hmm. So at the end of the day, there is a lot out there, and getting to it sometimes can be a bit of a challenge. So with all those things and points well made. So what I like to do is when I hear, the points that somebody brings to me, I kind of recap them a little bit. So what you're saying is when you go to these conferences, it's better. I'll even take it a step further than what you said. Maybe narrow your focus on the types of conferences you go to, knowing that your buyers of your product are going to be there to where it's focused. And then you have a list of those potential buyers, prospects, customers that may be in there. You focus in on some tailored messaging to engage with them. Mm-hmm. And then, give a compelling reason for them to come visit you at the conference floor, correct?
Correct.
And then when you get to webinars, what I heard and what I took away from that is you really like the approach, and I've participated in these, and I really, even though our competitors were all on there, a round table type webinar where it's multiple vendors talking about problems within the industry and ways of which they could solve those. So you think those two things are potentially very successful means of marketing today, correct?
I do. And going back to the conferences real quick, I think organizers are getting better at evolving. Like the traditional model beforehand probably isn't working as much. Like trade show floors aren't the same as they were like 5 years ago.
Right.
And so a lot of them are utilizing technology like their apps, so you can reach out to people ahead of time, see who has mutual interest. So there's a connection before the event too. So I think overall the conferences are helping marketers and attendees, with the conferences.
Yeah, and I'll agree with you because they had a streaming section set up where they were streaming live the presentations or the conversations that were happening, where there's some conferences that get dinged saying there's no virtual, this is not inclusive because you have no virtual option here. Yeah. I can't travel for XYZ reason. So they do need, I think they can still evolve a little more. I don't have the answers for that. I've never organized an event, but I think there is more they can do to support the vendors who in turn support, their conferences year after year. So with all this said, when you look at this, I think right now social is really important. I think podcasts are really important. I think what we're doing, connecting with one another, is really important. That's why we branded the podcast Connected Conversations, because we were so disconnected for the last couple of years. And now it's time to connect. It was so good to see you at that conference and reconnect after all this time in person. I mean, we've talked over the phone, we've talked over social, but we haven't seen each other in 4 or 5 years, something like that. And it's so great to get back with one another. I think connection's more important. To your point, which you led off with, authenticity is more important. So with all that considered, what do you think the future is? Is it the metaverse? Tell me about the metaverse. What is it? What is the future? I'm not asking you to tell me about the metaverse. I hardly understand it.
Okay.
What do you think the future is? What do you think the future director of marketing, the Lauren, 10 years from now?
Yeah.
What's that going to look like?
I think it's going to be more about quality than quantity. Okay. And that's not a new phrase. It's not a new thought, but we've talked a lot about focus and about targeting and about being specific and relatable even. So even in that, authenticity is an umbrella for all of that. If you're actually being real with what you're sending out to people, talking to people about, et cetera. So on the other hand, like the buzzwords and anything that just sounds like you're trying to check a box isn't going to hit with people. So marketing needs to evolve just as how people are evolving. B2B marketing used to be a lot more cut and dry than it is now because, brand new idea. The people who are buying from companies are also people and consumers in their normal life. And so businesses are now on Instagram and some of them are on TikTok, and they're bringing in business and they're bringing in revenue from these avenues that are like unheard of 2 years ago.
Do I need to start a TikTok account and start dancing? Or
I haven't seen you dance, so I don't know. Hurt.
No, but you're right, because Fred talks to me. Fred's the next generation younger than me, and he's like, we got to start looking at TikTok now, and putting some of this content out on TikTok because it's where things are going. So I think what I've noticed, and again, I agree. It's become more, Facebook, Instagram, the social aspects of things. And what I emphasize to sales reps is build connections within your industry. However you have to do it, stay very present on LinkedIn. When you go to conferences, go shake people's hands, talk to them. Don't give them a sales pitch. Just find out what's going on in their world.
Yeah.
Build that rapport with them. And who knows, maybe a couple years from now, there'll be an opportunity for you all to collaborate.
Yeah.
Maybe not today, but I do see social being a big driver of that, meaning the social platforms, and then in person more so than ever, building those connections with your industry and your community is very important.
Yeah. Well, people have said for years that real estate is more of a traditional industry, like you said, suits, instead of polo shirts and Converse. But, the pandemic kind of increase the speed at which everyone had to get used to doing things on a digital plane instead of in person. And now we're like trying to figure out where that balance is. Like, do we want to go all the way back to totally in person and dinners and all that? Or do we kind of like the bebop of liking things on LinkedIn and tagging people? Like,
I think it has to be meaningful, right? So if you haven't connected, like I had a customer, I texted him in the past, when I first started, texting a customer was taboo.
Yeah.
It really was. It was taboo. You did not text a customer. So I texted him. He's like, I was just going to call you. Let's connect. We talked for an hour. And then it was like, we gotta get together in person. It's been so long. And yeah, let's work on setting that up for later this summer. I think, and this is, I don't want to get too much into the back to the office thing and return to work, but what you just said is everything. I think things now have to be more meaningful. The idea of let's go have lunch for the sake of having lunch, maybe not. And it's that balance, right? We could do it virtual. Let's have this phone call virtual. We don't need to fly down there for this meeting, but I have some prospects that we are going to hop on a plane in a couple of weeks here and go sit down with them, because we have a purposeful meeting that we set up where we're going to do a workshop with them. We're going to bring people in. We're going to have trainers there to help them along the way. But I think we've driven to a place where things have to have meaning.
Yeah, I completely agree. And as great as this is, like, it's not the same energy as in person. And some people are very different in person than they are online. Internet issues, sound issues, whatever. The conversation can be totally tilted.
Yes.
So it does change.
Well, that's what these sessions are talking about: inclusion and equitable work. That everybody needs to have what they need to do their job. And for some people, and I sat through this session, it was focused on the metaverse. Like, somebody took a meeting in the metaverse, and it was weird the way the avatars worked and the way, the camera kind of turned, and they said for some people it just didn't work. And then other people were like, if I'm wearing, maybe you have to wear VR goggles for it, then they don't know what's going around them in the space that they're in the real world. And it doesn't, to your point, somebody might get stepped on and not be able to get their point across in the metaverse as they would be able to with a one-to-one interaction.
100%. And I get motion sickness from VR. I think it's mostly because my first experience was at a conference years ago, and they put it on me, and it was just spiders that were crawling on you. Anyway, so that was bad.
No, tell me more about this. I want to hear about, did you started to brush your skin, or what happened?
Yeah. It just felt like they were crawling towards you and you could feel them. It was really disgusting. So the idea of having meetings in a metaverse is unappealing to me. But I'm also a very outdoorsy person and grounded.
Yeah. It's I feel the same way. I said in that round table, I said, in a lot of ways, I like the idea of the metaverse. In a lot of ways, I really don't like the idea of the metaverse. And I think it's a bad direction to go in, especially, with our smartphones and texting people as opposed to calling people and doing things over Teams or Slack, as opposed to just, sometimes I have to instruct people, well, did you pick up the phone?
Yeah.
No, I was like, pick up the phone, go call the person, hear the tone of their voice, get to the root of their issue instead of going back and forth on these messaging platforms. So that's where I think the metaverse, it's I want to go sit and look and read somebody's body language. And if they're kind of making a facial expression, it's their turn to talk and they've heard, it's, you're sucking the oxygen out of the room. I want to have that interaction, and that, that kind of, the metaverse and technology, that's one of the bad sides, right? So
Yeah. For personal interactions, I totally agree. I think the potential for marketing and like digital buildings, is a little different, but we don't need to jump into all that.
So if I can recap just kind of what we went through, I think what we took away from this podcast is there needs to be, regardless if it's today or 10 years from now, there needs to be an authentic approach to marketing. Buzzwords get lost in the sauce. When everybody's saying the same thing, it just gets, it's noise, as you called it. If we're looking at things like conferences and webinars, I think what I'm going to take away from it is we have to be a little more thoughtful about how we're structuring our approach to a conference and how we're structuring the content provided in a webinar so that it resonates with our prospects and clients. And then another thing that I took away from what you really said is, speak their language. Mm-hmm. Right? And I really think a lot of these things aren't things that, I contemplated before this podcast. And this is why I want to do this podcast.
Yeah.
So that people can hear the Lauren Longs kind of talk about their approach to marketing and Proptech and all those things in the future. And then I think the last piece of it, what we covered here towards the end, is there's no replacing that human in-person interaction. You can't replace it with the metaverse. You can't replace it with a Zoom. We can augment it. Mm-hmm. It can be an addition to, but I think there'll never be a replacement for standing across from somebody and having that conversation with them face to face in a conference room or at a conference or in a cafeteria. Is that fair?
I totally agree.
So with that said, Lauren Long, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to speak with us and share a little bit of your insights in terms of marketing, the future of marketing, property tech. And I really appreciate it. And I always did. And I'm really happy to see that you kind of stayed in this industry. And I encourage you to continue to be a strong voice in this industry because I do think you have a lot to offer. The other thing is, if I can inspire you to support the younger generation so that they can look to you as a thought leader and say someday, just like your dad, you looked up to your dad as being the madman, that the younger generation, of all genders, look up to you and say, someday I want to be the Lauren Long of marketing at my company.
Well, thank you.
Can you do that? Can you do that for me?
I'll do my best. If anyone's watching this and wants to talk prop tech marketing, please reach out. I'd love to.
And you have a lot of great content that you can share that you've written in the past. And there's a lot of stuff from Lauren Long out there. So I just, again, want to thank you, Lauren. This is Bob Masachetti with Connected Conversations. This is Lauren Long, Jedi Marketing Master. And we want to thank you for your time today. And we look forward to seeing you again on Connected Conversations. I'll see everyone on the interwebs.